relatives redeeming a Jewish slave from a non-Jewish owner. Shani Hacha da Omer Kra, because the pasuk says Yigolenu, that they should redeem him. So it's unique to that the relatives can redeem this guy because he's owned by a non-Jew, and that's what the contract requires. And lozev lo la'acher, but no other slave can be redeemed. So if you have a Jewish indentured servant, his siblings can't come and buy him back from you unless you're willing to sell him, of course. So now, if it's not Rebbe, maybe it's the Balei Pluchta to Rebbe, who are the people that don't accept the Gezerah Shava. Uman Tana, the Palei Galei, the Rebbe, who are the Tanayim who argue over here with Rebbe? Rebbe Yosef Galili, Rebbe Akiva. It's Rebbe Yosef Galili and Rebbe Akiva, the Sanya. We continue in the Brisa, Lo Yigael Ba'ela. And the pasuk this time is said, if he was not redeemed by these people, then the pasuk goes on. Nonetheless, he goes out by Yovel, and the goy has to agree to that in the contract. Rabbi Yossi Aglili Aimer Ba'ela L'Shichror, he goes out to become free. Okay, we'll see what that means in a minute. B'shar kol hadarim, but if a non-relative, remember, Ba'ela meant relatives. If a non-relative, just a generous, rich guy comes along and redeems him, l'shibud, he would be transferred from the goy's bailus to the redeemer's bailus. In other words, it was simple a commercial transaction. He just bought him. Okay, that's how Rabbi Yossi Aglili learns it. But Rabbi Akiva, he learns it the exact opposite. But if he's redeemed by his uncle or his cousin or his brother, he goes into indentured servitude to that relative who redeemed him. But if a stranger redeems him, he goes free completely. So we're going to now do two ways of approaching this. We're going to first use a method of learning, and then we're going to use logic. Okay, so to get an understanding, so many times there are several psukim on a general topic with differences. So, for example, in our case, we're talking about a slave owned by a Jew, a slave owned by a non-Jew. Slave redeems himself, a slave is redeemed by someone else. So if in the context of the paragraph, let's say there are three ideas, so it's possible to interpret that in terms of hermeneutics three different ways. One, that the middle statement refers to the ish and adds to whatever was prior. The middle statement refers to and adds to what follows. And a third point of view is it affects both directions. Okay, so we're going to now see that Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Akiva differ in the technique used here to darshan. Okay, my time at the Rabbi Yossi Haglili, what's his rationale that if you're bought, that he gets to go to be enslaved by a stranger, but not by a relative. My time at the Rabbi Yossi Aglili, the pasuk says, Im lo yigael ba'ela, if he was not redeemed by them, meaning the relatives, ela ba'acher, by somebody else, yotza b'shnas hayovel, he goes free in the Yovel year, but he does not go free at the time of the transaction. Okay, that's how he learns it. Rabbi Akiva, who uses the same pasuk, but comes up with the almost opposite conclusion. Rabbi Akiva Omer, im lo yigoel ela ba'ele, if he was not redeemed by anybody but his relative, Yatza b'shnasa Yovel, then he goes free in Yovel. So if it's a relative, according to Rabbi Akiva, he's shibud to the relative. And if it's a stranger, he gets to go free. Rabbi Yossi Haglili, what now? Each is going to challenge the other's reading. Rabbi Yossi Haglili, midei ela ba'ela ksiv. Does the pasuk says be'ela except for these? It says Ela. It says Ela if you're not redeemed by these. So therefore, Rabbi Akiva, you can't do your interpretation. So Ela Bahai Krokamifli. So that's a good objection. So that's not the pasuk they're arguing about, but they're arguing about a different pasuk. Oh, Doiro, oh, Ben Doro Yigolenu. Either his uncle, his dodo, or his cousin, Ben Daidai, are the people who redeemed him. Oh, his Siga Yodo, or if he has enough money of his own, Zegu'ula Satzmo, that means he redeemed himself. Vinigol, and that those two circumstances he can be redeemed. Geula Sacherim, that, but vinigol, but the word vinigol in the pasuk, which is a riboy, it's not necessary for the simple meaning. That comes to mean gula sacherim, some other guy redeems him. So now we're going to find out how you would darshan that pasuk. Rabbi Yossi Haglili Sover Mikra Nidrash Lefanov. Rav Yossi Haglili says that a statement in the pasuk only clarifies further something preceding it in that sentence. Okay? Shidei gu'ulas krayvim agu'ulas atzmo. So he links his own redemption of himself to the previous statement of redemption by his uncle or his cousin. So if he redeems himself, obviously he goes free. He owns himself. So he connects it to the redemption by the uncle and the cousin and says he goes free if a relative redeems him. Just like redeeming himself, he's obviously free. The relative similarly. Rabbi Akiva, who has the opposite view, he holds, we'll see, Rabbi Akiva Sover Mikra Nidrash Le'acharav, that you connect his own purchase of himself to go free with the next statement, the permission of a non-relative, a stranger, to redeem him, and he would go free. Shadei geulas acherim ageulas atzmo. You toss the freedom by the rendered by the stranger buying him to connect that with the freedom of himself buying himself. Ma geulas atzmo l'shichrur afgulas acherim l'shichrur. Okay, so that the just like he frees himself, the non-relative frees him. So ihachi, if all that's true, why do they argue on how you darshan the pasuk? Ba'ela lamali. We had already the word ba'ela, that it was these, meaning the relatives. If we're going to use this pasuk, then that pasuk becomes irrelevant. Elav ba'ela. If we didn't have the word ba'ela in another pasuk, hava amina mikra nidrash ben lefanav ben lacharav. I would say we go B affects A and C. That would be the normal way to do it. But the fact that we have another limiting pasuk forces them to pick which way it's limiting. Okay? So, v'hakol shichrur. And if we did not have ba'ela, then whoever redeemed him, a relative, a stranger, himself, he would go free. Therefore, we need ba'ela to give them the right to darshan this pasuk. But if all that's true, hadar kushya leduchte. We're back to the original question. The whole thing became a big circle because, and you have to say that the Ba'ela pasuk says that it's only relatives that he goes free. That's the only real logical way to darshan that pasuk. So we can't say that it's Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yossi Galili debating the methodology of darshaning the pasuk. Okay, is that clear? Because this is complicated. If you have a question, raise your hand. Okay, Ella bisvara kamifligi. It has nothing to do with the psukim. They're arguing about the logic of the impact of the redemption. Okay, the impact of the redemption. You'll see what I mean. It makes sense to say if a stranger comes along and buys a Jewish servant from the goy, that it's a commercial transaction and he acquired the service of that servant. That's entirely logical. If he says the guy goes free, how the law parke law? Why would a guy come along and do this redemption? I mean, after all, we're not talking in a modern world. We're talking in a world where common thieves were sold into slavery. Every poor guy would find himself a generous master and sell him into slavery. So why would rich people go around redeeming these guys and setting them free? Not only is he losing his money, he's disrupting the structure of the economy. It makes no sense. So why does Rabbi Akiva go the other way around? And this is actually very cool. The Rabbi Akiva Savar Mistabra Gulas Krivim Lishibud. It's logical that if you're redeemed by your uncle or your cousin or your brother, that you should become his slave. If you say the guy goes free completely, call yoma v'yuma azel umizrave nafshe. A ne'er-do-well will sell himself on Monday. His relatives will redeem him on Tuesday. He'll sell himself to somebody else on Wednesday, and it would be ein davar l'sof. And that if you go free, all that happens is your relatives are out the money. So a lowlife is going to say, I don't care if my uncle's very rich, let him keep redeeming me. And he'll sell himself over and over. That's Rabbi Akiva's logic. Okay. So now so now we had so far, everybody agrees you free yourself, you're free. Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yossi disagree on the impact of relatives or strangers freeing you. But there's a new opinion now. Omer Rav Chia bar Ava, Omer Rav Yochanan, Zu Divrei Rabbi Yossi Aglili v'Rabbi Akiva. What we just said is a minority opinion, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Akiva, and they're each a das yachid. Aval, the Chamim, all the other rabbis seem to say, L'chol l'shichrur. I don't care if it's an uncle. I don't care if it's a rich neighbor. I don't care if it's a generous stranger or some foundation somewhere. Everybody who's bought back from a non-Jewish owner goes free. Man Chachamim, who are we talking about? Rebbe, that's Rebbe again. Demafik le lahai ba'ela ledrasha acharina, because he did not use the ba'ela to talk about only purchase by relatives being different than other purchases. Mikra nidrash bein lefanav bein leachrav, and he does agree that you learn both directions from Atzmo in the pasuk, in the other pasuk. So if he goes free himself, his uncle redeems him, he goes free, that's lefanav, and acherim, that's acharav, he also goes free. Okay. So now, for Rebbe, hi v'yatza b'shnasa yovel ma'yavidle. So if a guy gets redeemed in any manner whatsoever, and he goes free, what does the pasuk have to then say? And on yovel he goes free. He's already free. Meboyle kedesanya, we learn it for the following concept in the new brisa, v'yatza b'shnas hayovel. If he is not redeemed by anybody, he can't afford to redeem himself. His relatives don't like him, and there's no generous neighbor in the community. He still gets to go free like any other slave by Yovel, any other Jewish slave.
Oh, if he sold to a guy, he doesn't go free in Yovel.
Well, we had that yesterday morning. We asked the following question yesterday morning. What goy are we talking about? There's a concept of a ger tashuv, a non-Jew who lives in the within Jewish sovereignty and agrees to accept the rules and regs of the community. So if you have a non-Jew who accepts the authority of Bezdin to paskin, then you can say his contract has to include Yovel. Then the Gemara says, well, maybe we're talking about a non-Jew who doesn't accept the authority of the Bezdin. So the Gemara says that we wouldn't talk about him. He's not going to be bound by Jewish rules. There's nothing to talk about. So we have to say that this is a non-Jew who agrees that any contract he makes with another Jew you have in America, you have a contract, and at the bottom of the contract, it says the laws of the state of Florida will apply to a dispute, the laws state of Maryland. So his contract, the laws of the Bezdin apply to this contract. So he gets to go free. Okay, turn the page. But now, with all of these discussion we've been having now for about a day and a half is talking about your question, and an idolater, a non-Jew, who accepts the authority of Bezdin. Or maybe we're talking about, I jumped, maybe we're talking, your question is now answered by the Gemara. Or maybe we're talking about a guy who does not accept the authority of Bezdin. So what's the point of talking about it? He's not going to be affected by Jewish law, so there's no point in discussing him. Okay? So therefore, we have to be talking about, in other words, he's not going to give the guy up, even if the Torah says he should. So that's not on the table. He does accept the authority of Bezdin, and therefore the Jewish rules apply to him. Okay, so that ends that whole issue. And we're going on to the next statement in the Mishnah, that an Eved can be acquired through a deed, a contract. Okay? The shtar. Where do we get that idea? Minalan. Omer Ula, Omer Kro. There's a pasuk that says, now, the background of this pasuk. Mr. Schwartz bought a 9-year-old girl from Mr. Abramowitz. The halacha is at age 12, or she either goes free, or Schwartz marries her, or Schwartz gets her son to marry her. I heard it's worth taking the time. I heard it explained that that is not cruel at all, because it's a Jewish method of income redistribution. A poor man becomes the mechutin of the rich man, and they're not going to let him starve. Furthermore, the girl is going way up in status. She's now part of a wealthy household. So even though to us, this business of selling your 9-year-old daughter and then she's married at 12 is like bizarre, it was a valid part of the Jewish system of caring for each other.
I do that as foster kids.
What?
Foster kids. You have a family that says 10 kids and can handle them, so they give them over to another family.
Yeah, but only the girls.
Okay, yes. But boys to make care of the person.
Well, the problem is if you you could probably sell a boy, but he would never go free. He'd have to wait till Yovel.
Yeah.
All right, so weiter. So therefore, now we're going to make this comparison. Hekisha hakasuv la'acheres. The pasuk compares this girl who now became a part of the family to a second wife. Okay, because if the boy who married the little girl now marries another woman, they're co-wives. So ma acheres mikniya b'shtar, just as the young man could acquire a second wife using the methodology of a contract, af ama ivriya mikniya b'shtar. It's logical to say that the Jewish servant girl who becomes a wife in the family can also be acquired by a shtar. So now the Gemara is going to argue, like, who does this shtar, and what's the impact of that choice? That all makes sense, where the purchaser, in this case Abramowitz, who bought the little girl from Schwartz, he prepares the contract for his son to marry the little girl. But according to the Manda Omer, who says the girl's father, remember, she's not 12 yet and a half yet. So her father still has bilus if the Me'adon gives up bilus. If he prepares this marriage document, what are you going to say then? Then it is no longer comparable to a second wife. Second wife, the contract is with the woman. And here it's with her father. Now, with the Adon, it makes sense because he's her owner. But with the father, he's added a picture mostly at this point. I'm sorry, you have to speak louder. My hearing aids are broken.
Both parties have to sign the document.
No. It's like a deed. I mean, both parties are mentioned, but one party prepares the document. You sell your apartment, presumably your lawyer prepares the bill of sale. Now, the other guys mentioned it. And then also in the Jewish system, the parties to the contract never signed it. It was always witnesses who signed it. So it's a nice question, but it doesn't exist. It's who prepares the document that we're discussing, and then witnesses confirm that this was the deal. So is it the girl's father who prepares the document, or is it the man who bought her 4 years ago who prepares the document? That's the question. If we compare it to the man, the master, in a certain sense. There aren't any women here. When you get married, you're, quote, buying your wife. Now, we don't use a contract. We have a ksuba, but that's a promissory note. That's not a contract. But if we were to use a contract, the document would say Reuven ben Yosef is buying Sarah bas Shmuel to be his wife. Now, who would prepare that document? Presumably the chussan would. But over here, we're talking about a minor girl. She can't do it herself. So it would have to be the man who owns her. I, Harry Smith, am giving my servant girl to my son as a wife. Or her father, I, Joe Smith, am turning my daughter over to the buyer's daughter, son. Okay? And it's just a question of who wrote the contract. And based on who wrote the contract, how does it compare to a regular marriage? Because we want to say that her marriage is the same thing as a guy marrying a willing adult woman. That's the issue. The Itmar, we have a concept that says, Shtar Ama Ivriya Mi Kosvo. Who does the writing of this document? Rav Huna Omer Adon Kosvo, the master who bought her from her father, writes the document. Rav Chisda Omer Av Kosvo. No, it's the father who writes it. Okay? Ha Nithal Rav Huna. So everything works fine according to Rav Huna, because now this marriage contract is analogous. This transfer to and marriage contract is analogous to a regular marriage contract. Ella, the Rav Chisda, but what are you going to say if it's Rav Chisda, that the girl's father? Okay, if she's an adult woman, the girl's father does nothing except pay for the ceremony, for the caterer. Okay, Rav Achav Bar Yaakov. So Rav Yaakov Bar Yaakov says, Kra, this is how you interpret the pasuk. Lo teitze kitzeis ha avadim. She cannot leave this relationship like other servants leave their relationships with a master. Okay, I'm sorry, a Canaanite slave. So she cannot be given. Now she's married to the young man. He can't just give, and she was a slave. She cannot just be given a shtar shichrur. She has to be given a get. So she can't leave on the same manner that other slaves leave. Okay? Avo nichnes he kekinyan avodim. But bottom line, she's a slave girl. And you can acquire her the same way you acquire any other slave, a male Jewish slave, a female Canaanite slave, a male Canaanite slave, etc. Oh my ninhu, what is the normal manner of transferring the possession of a slave from one party to another? A shtar, a bill of sale. Okay? The aim, so maybe the pasuk doesn't mean what we just said it meant. Avol niknes he kekinyan avadim. But she still, who cares how she goes out? She still, the bottom line can be acquired the same way any other slave does. The Adon buys her from her father. And, okay. Oh my nihu. So what are we talking about over here? Okay, this I have to explain. Many of you may know this. Possessions go into various categories, right? You can have possessions that are called karka. They're fixed possessions. You own a farm, you own a house, you own a piece of property. And then there's metaltalin. My phone, my TV, my ring. They're not attached, and I can't get a mortgage on them. I can get a mortgage on a piece of karka. And the rules of inheritance are different for the two categories. Slaves are considered kakarka. Slaves are considered like property. So the way you take possession of a piece of property is by doing something in it or to it. So even though you paid money and you have a deed, from a halachic perspective, until you go and paint the wall in the living room, or dig a hole and put a plant in the yard, or some chazaka, some demonstration of your possession, it's not technically yours. Similarly with a slave, the way you finalize the transaction is you give the slave an order, go make me coffee, and the slave girl goes and perks the coffee. So that's a chazaka with a person. Okay, so here's the way you finalize the transaction of acquisition with a slave is chazaka amar kra. So now we're going to try to say maybe that's not true. Amar kra, there's a pasuk that says, "V'hisnachalatem oisam libneihem achareihem." You should hold slaves as a Yerusha for your children, just like your land is inherited by your children, your slaves are inherited by your children. But we've already learned that a Jewish slave goes free at the death of the master. So this pasuk may be limiting the concept of chazaka to non-Jewish slaves. Okay, oisamka b'chazaka, only non-Jewish slaves, v'lo acher b'chazaka, but not male or female Jewish slaves. So that disputes that you acquired the little girl with a chazaka. Ve'ema oisam b'shtar. So maybe the comparison is that Canaanite slaves can only be acquired by a shtar, v'lo acher b'shtar, but Jewish slaves have to be b'kesef or b'chazaka. That shtar wouldn't work. So we're going back and forth. The Gemara argues with that. V'ksiv, we have another pasuk. Lo teitze kitzeis avadim. She doesn't leave the same way that other slaves, meaning non-Jewish slaves, leaves. The implication being she comes in the same way. So we go back and forth, and the pasuk has to come out that chazaka isn't sufficient. So what do we see over here? Mistavra shtar havele keribli. That of the different ways of acquisition, shtar should be on the list of how you can become a Jewish slave, servant girl. Okay? Shechein moitza'a b'bas Yisrael, because a shtar, meaning geget, is the only way, other than death, that a Jewish girl can get out of a marriage. So if she goes out the same way she comes in, you need a shtar at one end and a shtar at the other. Gemara says, Adarabba, no, you got this all wrong. It's the other way around. Chazaka have like a riboy. What the pasuk is trying to tell us is making her make coffee. Is the chazaka? It's not literally make coffee, but putting her to work and she accepts the chore is the chazaka shechein kaina b'nichsei hager, because that's the way that the property of a convert is transferred. What we're talking about here is O'Reilly converts to Judaism and he accumulates property. But unfortunately, he has no children, no Jewish children. So when he dies, the property is Hefker. He doesn't own it anymore. He's dead. He has no sons. They don't own it. There's nobody owns it. So how are you going to write a star? With whom are you going to have a contract to claim that property? The only way you can claim that guy's farm is by marching in and start planting seeds. You have to have chazaka. That's the only methodology that's there. Okay, so now we're going to compare the acquisition of the servant girl to the buying of to the claiming of the Ger's farm. So the Gemara says, no, you can't do that. Beishus mehas lo ashkechan. You can't grab a girl off the street and order her to do something, and she complies out of fear, and then you say she's your wife. There's no such thing as chazaka with regard to marriage. It's bia, kesef, and shtar. So that won't work, okay? And if you don't like this logical explanation, we'll try Ibri, saying, if you want, you could argue like this. Hacha, acha, ne'im, acheres. Let's go back to the pasuk. If he marries a second wife, the young man who got the little girl from his tati, Rav Huna, according to Rav Huna, Hai lo teitze kitzei sahavadim, my dareshbo. How does he interpret the pasuk? That she doesn't go out like other slaves go out. Huma boile she'enu yotze v'rashe evarim ke'eved. There's a halacha that if the master causes physical injury to the limbs, the ears, the teeth, whatever, of his non-Jewish slave, that's immediate shichrus. He has to give him a shtar shichrur. But if you cut your little wifey's fingers off, she does not go free. Okay, that's how he interprets that. Rav Chisda, what does he do? If the pasuk is only saying that an injured child doesn't get to go free, liktav kro lo teitze avadim, it should say she does not go out like slaves without the chav. My kitseis avadim. What's that extra letter for?
Extra word, the chase.
No, the teitze or teitze is the same word.
Okay.
It's the extra letter. Shmami natarte. So the fact there's an extra letter means you can have two limudim. So one limud is she can't be freed with the fingers, and the other limud is she can't just get a shtar shikra, she has to have a get. All right. Next. V'kana as atzmo b'shanim, going back to the Mishnah, a Jew who sells himself to someone else, at the end of 6 years, nominally, he goes free. That's through years, okay? Sheish shanim ya'avod, the pasuk says, 6 years he must work. Ubeshvis, and on the 7th, he gets to go out and he gets presents, etc., etc. And then the pasuk says, Ad shnas hayovel ya'avod imach. That pasuk adds, but up until Yovel, he has to work for you. So that could be a conflict. Either it's 6 years or it's 50 years, right? So so I'm sorry, I lost my place. Just a minute. So Ad shnas hayovel yavod emach. He gets to go free then. So Omar Chizkiah says, why do we need both clauses, and how do we resolve the possible contradiction? the Amar Kra, the Hifte, that he should cause her to be redeemed. Malamed Shemagora Pidyoina V'Yotza'a. So if a slave is purchased for $600 for 6 years, at the end of 4 years, the slave can be redeemed for $200 because that's the unused portion of the contract prorated. Okay, and that's what it means. So if nobody is redeemed and Yovel intervenes, then he goes free at Yovel, or if he has a pierced ear, he waits till Yovel. Okay, Tana, we have a brisa. V'kaina es atzmo b'kesef u'b'shava kesef u'b'shtar. The Jewish indentured servant can buy himself back through money or through barter, something worth money, or through a contract. Bishleim, a kesef, money makes sense. Tiksiv, mi kesef, mi kanoso. He was purchased with money. Shava kesef nami, money, a barter also makes sense. Yashiv Geulaso, Omer Rachmana, the Pasuk says, he pays his redemption price. So if you're willing to take gold or you're willing to take a flat screen TV, that's good. That's Sheva Kesef. L'Rava Sheva Kesef, that includes money and like money materials. Elahai star, but what kind of star are we talking about here? Hey, dummy, what is it? Elema de kasavle stara adame. If you say, okay, so Shimei is a slave to Reuven. Shimei wants out. He says to Reuven, look, I've worked 4 years. I owe you, if I want to get out, I owe you $200. I'll give you an IOU for $200. And then you let me go free. So if that's what we're talking about, Hainu Kesef, that's money. Reuven, you can take an IOU, you can cash a check. An IOU is fungible. So it's the same thing as money. We can't say it means an IOU. Ella Shichror, are we talking about a document of manumission? Star Lomali. What do you need a document of manumission for? He's not a non-Jewish slave. He's a Jewish slave. He automatically goes free under certain conditions. He doesn't have to have documentation. Lame ape tray. All the master has to do is get 2 fellows who are kosher Yidden and say, I'm sending my slave away. I'm releasing my slave from servitude. Okay? Inami biape bedina, or he could go to a bezdin and he could say, I'm releasing my servant. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to make a little bit of a knage. A Goyish slave is physically owned by the Jew. He's a piece of property. A Jewish slave has no individual freedom. So to a limited extent, he's owned with quotation marks by his master. So we could argue that when he says, I'm releasing him, it could mean, as a Havamina, I'm freeing him from his obligation to work for me. But whatever incidence of ownership that I may have, that's not gone. And the star would accomplish that. That's what Omer Rava is going to say, Zoiso meres eved ivri, gufa konui, that the star shows that the Jew, to some extent, actually owns the Jewish slave. V'harav shemachal ad Giroinoi. So when the master waives his ability to boss him around, ein goroino mocho, but the ownership aspect of the relationship is not waived by the statement to witnesses or to a court.
Well, there's one time with Rubber, we weren't persuaded that David Avery cannot eat Suma because the Cohen doesn't own his.
That's why I said sort of and quotes. It's an ambiguous relationship. He's not inheritable property, so he can't eat truma, but he is restrained in his actions. If he runs away, for example, the master has the right to hire Simon Legree and track him down. And if he manages to get like to another country, he doesn't get his gifts. We're going to see that in the Gemara. Okay. Now the Mishnah went on, and we talked about how a Jewish servant girl, a little girl who gets sold when she's a little kid, has an edge, an extra factor in over a male Jewish slave. The Yisera Olav Amaha Ivriya, she has an extra edge, right? Amaresh Lekesh, Amaha Ivriya, Kaina es Atzba, Bamisas Ha'av, Uberishus Adon, Mikal V'chomer. Resh Lekesh comes up with this new notion. If the little girl's father dies while she's still a servant girl to the guy who bought her, she becomes her own master, and the boss the guy who bought her loses control over her. And he says it's a kal v'chomer. Ma simonim she'en meitzin meirishus ha'av. A little girl who's 12 and has signs of puberty is still under control of her father for 6 more months. She becomes what's called a naira when she shows pubic hair, and she becomes a boigros when 6 months later, when her maturity is more apparent. Okay, during the intervening 6 months when she's a naira, she still is under her father's control. He could still marry, he can't sell her anymore, but he can still marry her to anybody he wants. He can cancel her vows. The rules of, he can tell her what to do. Those rules still apply. So just as physical maturity to pubic hairs does not cancel the father's bias over the little girl, but the Mishnah told us that if the little girl gets 2 pubic hairs and nobody in the family marries her, she gets to go free. So we see the pubic hairs have more power, so to speak, by the Adon than by the father. When the father dies, she's no longer under his control, obviously. How couldn't we say logically that the father's death should release her from the master's control? So that's his attempt at a kal v'chomer. Meisvei Rev Hoshaya, he says, what are you talking about? Okay, or as Rev Shimon would say, get out of here. Okay, Yisera Olav Ama Avriya, the Mishnah said a Jewish girl slave has an extra clout over a male Jewish slave. Shekaina es atzma b'simonin, that she gains her freedom as soon as she has signs of physical maturity. Isa, if you're going to tell me that there's a second way she has an edge, that she gets to go free if her father has a heart attack, then the Mishnah should have added or the death of her father. Okay, so the Gemara goes with the normal way of dealing with something left out of the Mishnah. Tana v'shir. He teaches some things, he leaves out some things. Now, notice there's an S at the end of the word things. You can't give a list of things and say this one isn't on the list. But you can give a partial list and say these other items are not on the list. That's the rule. So my shire, the high shire. So what else is he leaving out that gives him the right to leave out the death of the father? Shire misas ha'adon. It says he leaves out that if the man who bought her dies, she gets to go free then too. If we're talking about that she gets to go free when the father dies, the master dies, lav shiurahi, that's not a legitimate exclusion. The cave and the economy be ishlo katane, because that method applies to male slaves too, and it's not on the list. So it balances out. It says the girl has an edge over the boy slave. So the only edge she has at this point is simonin. Ella. So let's say listening. So the first answer is okay. Let's revise the Mishnah, or the Tana of the Mishnah really made a mistake. It should have been on the list. So Reish Lakish says, no, I have a different rationale. There are things that are definitive. In other words, September 23rd comes after September 24th. 25th never comes after the 23rd. The 24th always comes after the 23rd. And you can determine that. Okay? But death is an abnormal thing. People have a chazaka of being alive. You can't say death is definitive date to death. Okay, so Tana davar sheyesh lo kitzvah tane. The items on the list are only things that have definitive time frames or definitive results. Davar she'ein lo kitzvah lo katane. We did not list things that are indeterminate as to when they might occur. So the Gemara says, "Ha simonim da'ein lehem kitzvah," but pubic hair doesn't come automatically on the girl's 12th birthday in every single little girl. You can't say that physical maturity is kitzvah, the katane, and yet it's in the Mishnah. So you Reish Lakish have to be wrong. So Rav Safra explains that it is possibly kitzvah. Amar Rav Safra ein lehen kitzvah l'mayla. We don't know if she'll have pubic hair from 12, and when she's 12, or maybe 12 in a few days, or maybe 12 in a few months. There's no outer limit. But the aval yesh lehem kitzvah, turn the page, lamata. There is an earlier kitzvah because pubic hair prior to becoming an adolescent, let's put it that way, is not defined as pubic hair. Hair on the groin, and when you're 10 years old, is not called pubic hair. That's what Gemara is going to say. So lamata, earlier than 12 or 13 in the case of a boy, there is a limit. And, and it is definitive. You have to be 12 or 13 for it to be called pubic hair. Tisanya, we have a brisa. Bein teisha shanim shahevi shtei cyrus. If a little 9-year-old boy, actually up to 9-year-old boy, has pubic hair, has two black hairs on his groin, okay, shuma, It's considered the outgrowth of a mole. It's not considered a pubic hair. Mi ben tes shanim v'yom echad, but from his 12th his 9th birthday, ben yud beis shana v'yom echad, up until 12 and a day, his 12th birthday. The Oiden bow, and those hairs that have been there for a couple of years are still there. Shuma, they're not pubic hairs. They're leftover, still there, mole hairs. Okay? That's one opinion. Okay, now. Rabbi Yosef bar Yehuda Omer Simon. Rabbi Yosef bar Yehuda says if they're still there when he's 12 and a day, they are pubic hairs. Ben Yud Gimel Shana Liyom Echad, and if they start when he's 13 and a day, Divrei HaKol Simon, everybody agrees that hair growth in the groin area at birthday 13th birthday and up is pubic hair. Even if the kid's got virulent acne, it's not moles, it's pubic hair. So here we see a limit. Okay? Now, Macy Rav Sheshis wants to challenge this. Rav Shimon Aimer, Daled Ma'anikim Lahem. 4 categories of Jewish indentured servants are given gifts from their master when their service is up. Gimel Be'ish, 3 of them apply to men. The Gimel Isha, and 3 of them apply to women, so there's obviously an overlap. Okay, it's impossible to say that all 4 can apply to either gender. Because little boys who are enslaved do not go free when they reach physical maturity, but little girls do. So that one is unique to girls. The Ein Ritzia Be'isha, and the concept of extending your servitude by getting your ear pierced does not apply to women. So there cannot be 4 with women and there cannot be 4 with men. Okay, the Im Iha, if you want to tell me that the little girl goes free on the death of her father, Nisne Nami Misasa'av, we would have to add to the list the possibilities, the death of the father, and now there'd be 4 for the girl. Okay? So, are you telling me that the list is not exclusive? That it doesn't literally mean 4, 3, and 3? Okay, but you can't do that because it's very definitive. It says there are 4 categories, 3 apply to men, 3 apply to women. It's almost impossible to be more definitive than that. If you're saying we're only talking about things that can have definitive time frames, but we're not talking about indeterminate things like somebody's death. But we just discussed that pubic hair is not definitive. Sometimes you're 12 and a half before you have hair. Okay, the Katani, and yet it's still in the list. We're going to go back and take Rav Safra's lower limit. It's kitzpah, but the upper limit is open-ended. We still have that a Jewish slave, male or female, goes free upon the demise of the master. He's not inherited by the heirs, or she's not inherited by the ears. And that certainly doesn't meet any definition of kitzbah. So the katani, and it's still on the list. Okay. Mehas Adonami lo katani. But the fact of the matter is, the master's death is not in the list. So maybe that's a loophole. Okay, the Ela Arba Maininhu. So if we're going to say therefore, and we're a little flexible on are there more, then exactly what are the four? Shanim, the servant goes free after 6 years. The Yovel, that's 2, the servant goes free by an intervening Yovel or a Yovel for a pierced ear fellow. The Yovel shall ritzia, the Yovel for the pierced ear fellow. Va'ama avriya b'simanim, and the little girl who reaches maturity while in servitude. That's the list of 4. Hachinami mistaber, and it makes sense to say that that's the list. The Katani Seifa, because later on in that same brisa it says, Iato yachal omer arba b'yechad mehem. No, all 4 can't apply to either gender. Okay, lefi she'ein simonim be'ish, because physical maturity does not release a male slave. Okay, the ein ritzia be'isha, and pierced ears don't apply to women. The im isa, if you want to tell me that death of the master should be added to the list, the isha meha mishkachas la arba, then you would have 4 applying to a woman. Yovel, years, hair, and death. So there would be 4 for the woman. So the statement there are only 3 would be incorrect. Shmami no, death of the master is ignored by the Mishnah because it's ein kitzbah, and therefore there's no raya to the father, and that dumps Reish Lakish's notion that the death of the father can free the slave girl. Mesev Rav Amram, he wants to argue with everything we've said so far. Okay? The Elu Manikin Lahen. This is the category of servants who get freed and get gifts. Haitse Mishanim, one who goes out after 6 years. Oh, Miha, okay. The Yovel, or he goes out with an intervening Yovel year. Misa Sadon, or he goes out when the master dies because the heirs can't inherit. The Amma of Ria B'Simanim, and a Jewish girl slave when she reaches physical maturity. The Im Isa, if you're going to tell me that she also gets to go free if her father dies, Nisne Nami Mesasa, the Mishnah or the Brisa in this case should have said, or the death of dad. The Chitematan of a Shire, if you're telling me going through the same logic, if you're telling me it's a not exclusive list and there are other items, Vaha Elu Katani, but it uses the word Elu, that it is an exhaustive list. These are the items to the exclusion of all others. The Chitema, and if you want to try another argument, Davar Sheyesh Lo Kitzvah Katani, that we're leaving out, we're only listing things that have definitive time frames. 6 years, 6 years, maturity is maturity, etc. Davar she'ein lo kitzvah lo katani, that's left out. Ha simanim dein len kitzvah, same old argument. Pubic hair is not the definitive date that it happens. The katani, it's still on the list. And if you want to say we're only worried about the lower limit, you still have the death of the master, which you can't argue with kids, but nobody knows the day he's going to die, not on the upper limit, not on the lower limit. If the doctor tells you have 6 months to live, you just don't pay his bill. He'll give you another 6 months. All right. But you still have the death of the master. Tiyufta the Reish Lakish, Tiyufta. At this point, it seems this is a clear refutation, and little girls should not pray for their fathers to die because it ain't going to affect their servitude. Okay? But Reish Lakish isn't giving up so fast. He reminds us that he didn't just do this from Spara. He brought a Kal V'chomer. V'ho Reish Lakish Kal V'chomer, Omar. He made a Kal V'chomer. Kal V'chomer Pricha. That's a flawed Kal V'chomer. It doesn't work. Lemifrach. You can challenge it. Kal V'chomer, there has to be a balance of factors on both sides. Mal simanim shenishtan nahaguf. When the little slave girl gets pubic hair, that's a physical change in her body. Her shape changes. She gets the female form, etc., etc. There's a big difference in her body. Timer b'misas ha'av shein lo nishtana haguf. Does her body change because her father died? It doesn't change at all. And I guess we'll stop there. So we picked up a little ground. And I apologize for taking so long.
Right, thank you very much.
So Ruben asked yesterday when we were learning, what is all this stuff about slaves doing in this Gemara? It's Kedushin. So the answer is that we're drawing parallels between the marriage process and the slave process. Correct. Right. Well, yeah, but it's more than a star kesed. You have the divorce or a star shichrur. There are all sorts of parallels. So they're trying to pick out, well, but this doesn't fit the parallels. And then we say, well, it really does. It's because a pasuk excludes it. And that's what this whole shakla v'tarya is about.
Somebody told me it's all about violence, the whole sector.
Okay, Bilus, it's the same thing as kinyan. Bilus means you own her, but you can't. In our world, I mean, I learned with Ruben at my house. My wife sits there listening, and when he leaves, she beats me up. Because you tell my wife that I own her. Right.
Yeah, that may be your last day.
Right. That may be what the Torah says, but she says otherwise.